working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines.
As we get it.
The 72-year-old Asian immigrant who killed 11 people before shooting himself as police moved in on him was once a regular at the California dance club where a tragic gun massacre unfolded.
These are implied that
President Marcos Jr. announced that private money may be used for the proposed Maharlika Investment Fund, but he gave assurances that safeguards will be in place so it cannot be used for money laundering. And the Australian government is now looking to speed up the purchase of new generations of sea mines to protect its ports amid growing concern over China's military buildup and expanding influence in the Pacific. The Philippine government should remove non-tariff barriers and allow more imports to bring down commodity prices nationwide. That is according to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. First in our news, the 72-year-old Asian immigrant who killed 11 people before shooting himself as police moved in on him was once a regular at the California dance club where the tragic gun massacre unfolded. Detectives probing why this elderly Asian immigrant shot dead 11 people as they celebrated Lunar New Year at the dance hall in California are examining whether jealousy or a personal dispute was behind this tragedy. Let's hear more from the Los Angeles Sheriff Office.
It forth as we get it. I think some of this information may have gotten out the last several hours, but I do regret to inform everybody that we did unfortunately have an 11th victim that passed away. So now we have a total of 11 victims that unfortunately have died as a result of this tragic incident. So as most of you are aware, last night we served a search warrant at the suspect's residence in the city of Hemet. As a result of the search warrant service, investigators recovered a few items of interest. And these are just, it's a summary, not everything we recovered. We recovered one .308 caliber rifle, numerous electronic devices such as cell phones, computers, etc. Items that lead us to believe the suspect was manufacturing homemade firearm suppressors. An unknown amount, I say unknown amount, and I'll explain that here, of .308 caliber and 9mm caliber ammunition. And the reason we say an unknown amount, they were in containers, and there are hundreds of rounds. We don't know exactly how many there were. A lot of loose ammunition, so eventually, you know, we'll get to exactly how many those were. From the Monterey Park scene, where the victims were assassinated, investigators recovered a total of 42 shell casings and a large capacity magazine. So 42 rounds were fired by the suspect at that location. Investigators also recovered a Norinco 7.62 by 25 handgun from inside the suspect's cargo van. That's the handgun that you saw being recovered from the van yesterday afternoon. That firearm was registered to the suspect. We have also learned that the firearm, which was wrestled away from the suspect at the Alhambra scene, was a 9mm caliber semi-automatic MAC-10 assault weapon. Regarding the suspect's background, he has a limited criminal history with an arrest in 1990 for an unlawful possession of a firearm. But did he plan this? Was it the day of? Was it a week before? What drove a madman to do this? We don't know. But we intend to find out. And we're as curious as you are, because it's, I mean, this is disturbing. how can you even come to reason that somebody would even think about doing something like this? It's horrendous.
Tran, whose name is typically Vietnamese, immigrated to the United States from China, according to a marriage certificate his ex-wife showed CNN. The woman, who did not want to be named, told the network she had met Tran 2 decades ago at a Star Ballroom dance studio where he was a regular. The studio, whose website says it was founded in 1990, offers classes in all types of dance, from children's ballet to Latin steps to belly dancing. Tran's ex-wife says he introduced himself to her at the club, offering her free informal lessons. The couple married a short time later, but the marriage didn't last. She said Tran, who sometimes worked as a truck driver, wasn't violent, but could be impatient, especially if he felt he was being shown up, for example, by her messing up a dance step. Now, court records cited by CNN showed the couple were divorced in 2006. The friend described how Tran would drive from his home in San Gabriel, a city 3 miles from Monterey Park, nearly every night. But Tran would complain about the dance teachers, who he claimed would say evil things about him. The man told CNN, describing Tran as hostile to a lot of people there. In tonight's other news, President Marcos Jr. announced that private money may be used for the proposed Maharlika Investment Fund. But he gave assurances that safeguards will be in place so it cannot be used for money laundering. The president made the remarks amid concerns by some lawmakers that the MIF can be misused or could drain the government of much-needed funds. Take a look.
Implies that private monies will be put into the fund. But yes, private monies will be involved with the fund, but it's not a savings account that you just put it there and it stays there. No, what will happen is the Maharlika Fund will serve as the seed fund for the sovereign wealth fund, and the 40 billion, 30 billion, 40 billion, whatever it may come to at that point, is going to serve as a seed money for the fund. Now, whenever we come into partnership, we do a G2G with Japan, for example, or we do a PPP with some big outfit, then that is only the time that the monies come into the fund to be used for the program. Hindi yun basta o sige, bigyan niyo ako ng ilang bilyon dolyar, tapos lalagay lang yun, akong bahala na dyan. It's not like that at all. And in fact, even on our end, we will only deploy funds when there is a very specific project to be paid for.
The president also stressed that he is lukewarm to the proposal made during the 2023 World Economic Forum last week that funds from government-owned and controlled CoOp corporations, or GOCC, be used to finance the MIF. Take a look.
I agree with that. You cannot use funds of the GOCC. Pera ng gobyerno, what will the government spend? It was a proposal. It's not something that we have adopted. The GOCCs, there are several problems, because I remember we had a little meeting, lasted about 15 minutes, and that was proposed. But after the meeting, I pulled Secretary Ben Jokno aside, and we said, what do you think? Sabi niya, hindi yata pwede. And I said, it's too disruptive. Think, every single GOCC has its own charter. How will you will then revise all of those charters to align with the Maharlika Fund? That's not the purpose of the GOCC, number one. Number two, this is a lot of income that goes to the national government that will suddenly disappear. So that will be it will not disappear. It will go into the Maharlika Fund and cannot be used for the budget of the national government. I don't think that that's a viable proposition, at least not for us.
President Marcos said the Philippines and China have yet to reach a compromise that will allow Filipinos to fish in the contested West Philippine Sea. The president made this remark after the Philippine Coast Guard bared that it's investigating an incident involving a Chinese Coast Guard vessel that allegedly shooed away a Filipino fishing boat in Ayungin Shoal earlier this month. Following the incident, the president said the Philippine government made immediate use of direct communication with China to deal with miscommunication in the contested sea. Again, let's listen in.
That we have to raise the level of discourse between the Philippines and China. Now, we already have a bilateral group that's working on issues about the South China Sea. Now, my proposal is that we bring that bilateral group to a higher level. It's a sub-ministerial level ngayon. So let's bring it to a ministerial level. And I will ask my foreign secretary to be part of it. I will ask my ambassador to China to be part of it. And I guarantee you that if there is any decision that needs to be made, either of those gentlemen can pick up the telephone and talk to me. And within 5 minutes, we will have a decision. I hope that China can do the same. And that is what the President Xi was agreeable. And he said, why not? So he assigned his foreign minister to take care of the details. That's what we're working on. In ASEAN, we all came to the agreement that at the very least, in ASEAN, in the Asia-Pacific region, the future of the region must be decided by those in the region, not by some outside power. And so I think the idea, I do not know of the formal, I do not know of any formal meetings or conferences of the non-aligned nations. They used to have them. They don't have them very much anymore. I don't know about that, but we are very much in the spirit of that treaty. We are very much part of it in the sense that we continue to walk that very fine line between two great superpowers who are surrounding us both physically and geopolitically.
Now, President Marcos said the hotline should not stop them from filing protests or sending note verbals. He also hoped that the Philippines and China would soon come up with an arrangement that will allow Filipinos to fish in the West Philippine Sea. The Biden administration is plowing ahead with plans to reopen the U.S. Embassy in the Solomon Islands in a bid to counter China's increasing assertiveness in the Pacific. The State Department has informed Congress that it will establish soon an interim embassy in the Solomon's capital of Honiara on the site of a former U.S. consular property. It said the modest embassy will at first be staffed by 2 American diplomats and then 5 local employees at a cost of $1.8 million per year. A more permanent facility with larger staffing is eventually envisioned, it said. The department notified lawmakers nearly a year ago that China's growing influence in the region made reopening the U.S. Embassy in the Solomon Islands a priority. Now, since that notification last February, the Solomons have signed a security pact with China, and the U.S. has countered by sending several high-level delegations to the islands. The U.S. closed its embassy in Honiara in 1993 as part of a post-Cold War global reduction in diplomatic posts and priorities. But it has since determined that China's rise as a regional and global power demands American attention as part of its Indo-Pacific strategy to counter Beijing, particularly in the Solomon Islands, which were a key battleground in the Pacific theater during World War II and where pro-American sentiment had been high. Since the administration first announced its plan to reopen the U.S. Embassy in the Solomons in February, the nation moved ahead with a security pact with China, sparking fears that Beijing might establish a military base on the islands. China has also increased its economic and infrastructure assistance to the Solomons, as it has done with other Pacific islands. The Solomon Islands Prime Minister assured the U.S. and other Western allies, like Australia and New Zealand, after signing the deal with Beijing in April, that he would not allow China to set up a naval base in his country. But concern about Chinese intentions has not abated. In July, the U.S. sent 2 senior officials, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and U.S. Ambassador to Australia Caroline Kennedy, to the Solomons to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Guadalcanal and to highlight nearly century-long ties between the islands and the U.S. The fathers of both Sherman and Kennedy fought in the Solomons during the war. As it moves to enhance ties with the Solomon Islands, the U.S. is also seeking to shore up relations with other Pacific nations that it fears may also be drawn into China's orbit. Negotiations are ongoing for the renewal of the so-called Compact of Free Association Agreements between the U.S. and the Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia and Palau, and those pacts expire within the next 2 years. Meanwhile, the Australian government is looking to speed up the purchase of a new generation of sea mines to protect its ports amid growing concern over China's military buildup and expanding influence in the Pacific. The Department of Defense said in a statement Monday the smart sea mines would be able to discriminate between military targets and other shipping vessels and be a significant deterrent to potential aggressors. Now, the news was first reported by Australia's 9 newspapers on Monday, which said the cost could be as much as 1 billion Australian dollars, although the final total was still considered confidential. The department did not release information on the cost of the mines. Australia has sought to bolster its military forces in recent years to help counter China's rapid military expansion in the region. In the past year, there were at least 2 reported incidents of confrontations between Australian and Chinese forces, including one just off Australia's north coast. At the same time, Beijing has broadened its diplomatic footprint in the Pacific, signing a security agreement with the Solomon Islands that could see Chinese warships docked just 2,000 kilometers from the Australian mainland. Now, Australia is currently in negotiations with the U.S. and the UK to acquire a fleet of nuclear submarines by 2040 as part of the wide-reaching AUKUS security partnership. An announcement on the design of the new vessels is expected within months. In other news, in this January 2023 quarterly update, AMRO revised downwards its short-term growth forecast for the ASEAN +3 region. Deteriorating global economic conditions are weighing on the region's outlook, but China's reopening last December should provide some counterbalance. AMRO estimates ASEAN +3 growth for 2022 to come in at 3.3%, down from the 3.7% growth forecast in October. Now, this is due mainly to continuing weakness in +3 economies, especially China, where growth has turned out to be much weaker. Growth in the ASEAN region, buoyed by strong domestic demand, is revised upwards to 5.6%. This year, growth in the ASEAN +3 region is projected to strengthen to 4.3% as China's economy is expected to rebound strongly, reflecting the removal of containment measures and reopening of its economy. Inflation is anticipated to come down to 4.5% this year from the projected 6.3% spike last year. The AMRO also said in a note that as the global economy emerges from the pandemic crisis, member economies should strengthen infrastructure investments to seize a growing opportunity in the post-pandemic era and address rising policy issues such as climate change. It said a large infrastructure gap still exists in economies given the need for both traditional and new infrastructure. In tonight's other news, Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno told foreign investors and business leaders that the Philippine economy is resilient enough and that the government is doing its best to address post-pandemic challenges. Mr. Diokno made the remarks during the Philippine economic briefing attended by the economic managers in Frankfurt, Germany, that was streamed through various government agency Facebook pages. Let's listen in.
Our strong macroeconomic fundamentals and structural reforms have enabled the Philippine economy to weather the effects of the pandemic and position itself as one of the fastest rising economies in the Asia-Pacific region. Let me share with you some of the latest numbers. For the first 3 quarters of 2022, our average growth reached 7.7%, overtaking our full-year target of 6.5 to 7.5%. The Philippines outperformed its peers, exceeding the growth rates of major economies in the region like Indonesia, Singapore, and China. This expansion was broad-based, driven by growth in all major production sectors, services, agriculture, and industry, despite high prices of fuel and other commodities globally. Our growth was buoyed by robust domestic aggregate demand, which expanded by 10.8% due to strong household consumption and investments. 3 days from now, we will announce the full year GDP growth for 2022. It will be announced by Secretary.
Relatively, Diokno assured investors that the government has put in place a fiscal consolidation program to address the uptick in government liabilities, due in part to the increased borrowing to finance pandemic-related programs. He identified 3 factors that will support the government's fiscal consolidation, and one of this is the fact that only a small fraction of, he said, our outstanding debt is exposed to interest rate resetting. This, as bulk of the government liabilities are sourced from domestic fund sources, with around 75% of the borrowing program allocated to the domestic market. He said we already have anticipated the tightening monetary policy conditions when they formulated the interest rate payments in the 2023 budget. He added that the government securities market is dominated by local players that are bank-centric and homogeneous in investment governance. These, he said, are strong backing for the government's fiscal consolidation. The national government should remove non-tariff barriers, or NTBs, and allow more imports to bring down commodity prices nationwide. That is according to the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. In the Philippine Economic Briefing in Frankfurt, Germany, BSP Governor Felipe Medalla said inflation in the country is still traceable to supply shocks that have caused shortages in certain commodities. Let's listen in.
The Philippine inflation is largely a supply shock inflation. Initially global, later on shortages of agricultural products like sugar, onions. So obviously the solution is import more and get rid of all the non-tariff buyers. Because the main reason it cannot import is it's so hard to get import permits. And I'm satisfied that the government is now doing everything it can to speed up importation.
Now, these efforts, Medalla said, would help bring the country closer to the midpoint of the 2.4% BSP inflation target by 2024. By the last quarter of the year, inflation nationwide could already be below 4%. Based on the country's history, Medalla said the longest time the country has seen inflation of about 4% is 15 months. The country has also experienced at its worst 4 large shocks in a span of only 4 months. Medalla said it took around 16 months before the base effects created from these shocks wore off. But since most of these past shocks have not been accompanied by wage price inflation, secondary inflation effects didn't emerge. Still, Mr. Medalla said the recent supply shock that the economy experienced is worse than before. This means the supply shock impact on inflation may last 16 months to as long as 18 months before it wears off. Finally, in our news, 5 billion people are exposed to higher heart disease risks through trans fat. That is according to the World Health Organization, calling out on countries that have failed to act against the toxic substance. The WHO issued an appeal in 2018 for the industrially produced fatty acids in foods to be eliminated worldwide by this year. Amid evidence, it caused 500,000 premature deaths every year.
Trans fat are a particular kind of fat that you find naturally in food coming from animals such as cows, ruminants, in dairy or products or in meat, or can be added by the industrial manufacturing to food. These trans fats are very bad for our health. They are responsible for a large amount of heart disease and stroke we see. WHO has been setting a goal to eliminate all industrial trans fat from the food supply by the year 2023. and has asked government to put in place policies to ensure that no trans fat can be present in food. We now have 43 countries with good practice policies, and increasingly countries from low and middle income countries. This year we had India, Bangladesh, who have passed such policies, and there's discussion with other countries such as Nigeria, so that they also establish good policies. This is already 2023, so we need to accelerate progress to achieve this important public health goal. It would be the first risk factor for non-communicable disease such as heart disease to be eliminated. We have many small producers that use trans fat. Street food often has trans fat, so actually implementing policies would require a collective effort to understand that the problem is there and to help identify the suitable solution. It is possible to replace trans fat, industrial trans fat, with healthier oil sources without an impact on taste of food or without an impact on the cost of food. So this is something which can be done. By implementing a well-designed public health strategy, you can actually make enormous progress. But scale is the solution. So even if we have done good progress, we want to cover the whole world. And to make those next steps requires really a collective effort.
Now, the WHO also encourages food manufacturers to eliminate industrially produced trans fat from their products, aligning to the commitment made by the International Food and Beverage Alliance, or IFBA. Major suppliers of oils and fats are asked to remove industrially produced trans fat from the products sold to food manufacturers globally. The report, called Countdown to 2023 WHO Report on Global Trans Fat Elimination 2022, is an annual status report published by WHO in collaboration with Resolve to Save Lives to track progress towards the goal of trans fat elimination this year. While most trans fat elimination policies to date have been implemented in higher income countries, largely in the Americas and in Europe, an increasing number of middle income countries are implementing or adopting these policies, including Argentina, Bangladesh, India, Paraguay, the Philippines, and Ukraine. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast of ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.